Hey, it's Justin Harvey. Thanks for tuning in to the Anesthesia and Pain Management Success podcast. With APM Success, we take a close look at important topics pertaining to business, practice management, personal finance, and careers for anesthesiologists and pain management physicians. We work hard to take your critical questions straight to the experts. Thanks for listening. This week, I had a really great time talking to Dr. Navin Goyal. I was really inspired by Dr. Goyal's story. He was practicing clinical anesthesia for a long time in a private practice in Ohio, and he eventually transitioned to entrepreneurship, part-time at first, and then full-time, launching a company called SmileMD where they provide dental anesthesia services. Now, I don't know if you know anything about dental anesthesia. I knew very little prior to having this conversation, but what I found is that access to timely care for dental patients in America, especially pediatric dental patients, it's a real problem. And in certain urban areas, there can be months long, or in some cases years long, waiting lists for procedures that need to happen in a hospital exclusively because of the anesthesia care that has to be provided. So Dr. Goyal has a really interesting business, really impactful, and I had a great conversation with him. So I hope you enjoy listening to today's episode as much as I enjoyed this conversation. As always, thanks for tuning in. Hello and welcome to episode 81 of APM Success. I'm very pleased to be joined this week by Dr. Navin Goyal. Dr. Goyal is a board-certified anesthesiologist who, in addition to his clinical anesthesia work, founded a dental anesthesia business a little while ago. And this is something that I've long been interested in trying to understand. And I'm really excited to be talking to Dr. Goyal today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I'm really happy to be here.
For starters, maybe just give us a flavor for your background, just professionally and clinically.
Yeah, so I, went to medical school. I grew up in Ohio, in Columbus, and went to medical school in Cincinnati, and did my residency in Chicago at the University of Chicago, and loved it. Loved the city of Chicago. Loved residency. Very intensely liked anesthesiology. And one of my old classmates actually told me that I was the only person that said I was passionate about anesthesia, which usually is not in the same sentence. But I ended up doing a private practice back in Columbus and was part of a large hospital-based organization for 13 years. I became medical director of one of our hospitals a few years into it, which taught me a lot of leadership, taught me a lot about the boardroom and where the physician plays a role. And then I ended up doing some angel investing, which got me exposed to some entrepreneurs and gave me sources of inspiration that I really never tapped into. And as I got to know some of these entrepreneurs, it really started broadening my mindset of what a person can do. Put your mind to it. You can leave the comfort of a job or some stable kind of pathway and pursue a passion that you feel is your calling. So pretty soon after, in 2014, I co-founded a company with two other close friends who are anesthesiologists called SmileMD, which is a mobile anesthesia company.
So awesome. So maybe for starters, talk a little bit about your transition from residency into clinical practice and picking the private practice that you ended up working with for so long. How did that transition go for you? And what were the things you were thinking about at that time?
Yeah. So when I was finishing up residency, I knew I wanted to go into private practice. Academics wasn't my thing. I was ready to just do some work and, obviously better comp packages. And academics was, at some point, that's all residency. You get a lot of these didactic, great people, but not necessarily people who just want to practice. And I felt like I was ready for it after all the journey of anesthesia. So I picked a private practice in Columbus that was known to be a great practice. It was very broad, and especially coming out of residency, you want to do every case. You want to continue to do a lot of the same, a broad array of cases. And it had multiple hospitals, surgery centers. They did hearts. They did a lot of different things, and it seemed like a perfect fit. I was one of the few who left my class and did not do a fellowship. Our chairman, along with, it seems like everyone in academics, scares the heck out of you to do a fellowship, to specialize, because, someday there's going to be so many doctors and things that you have to compete with, which I don't think will happen. I don't think will ever happen. But I was a rebel and I went straight to private practice.
That's funny. And it worked out okay, it seems like.
and it worked out okay. I'm actually glad I didn't spend another year training. I joined the private practice, and as many know, it's a learning curve. It was stressful, but the practice was great. And after a couple years, after I passed, the oral boards, and you have more time now on your plate. That's when I started to think about, okay, what should I do with this free time?
Yeah, so tell me about that. And it's funny because I know a handful, maybe it's just because of how I'm wired. I'm an entrepreneur and I love thinking creatively about business and opportunity and how do we solve problems. And I just attract these people, but I seem to have at least a handful of anesthesiologist friends who have this similar inclination. So talk about how that started for you and what happened at that time.
Yeah. So I read the newspaper, the Wall Street Journal, every single day, and I found myself veering towards the business section. And I really was, I get my energy from other people and inspiration. So when people talk in an you know inspirational manner, or music, or people that just seem to exude inspiration, my energy just goes to another level. And so I found myself reading about the stories of entrepreneurs, or reading about companies who went through so many obstacles and they got acquired or went public, or had some crazy impact of a brand that I can relate to today. I also felt like the books I was reading, which I never read books growing up outside of the necessary school books. My parents always told me to read, and suddenly at the age of early 30s, I have some time, and I start reading, and I really start to enjoy reading. And once again, I start picking more entrepreneurial stories, books on business, books on how companies got built, and it just seemed like an interest to me.
I'm curious, you talked about being inspired. Are there any particular people or particular stories that you remember that had inspired you to pursue this business track?
Yeah, there's a lot of people that inspire me, but I was reading the books of Elon Musk and Steve Jobs, and I know a lot of people know their story, but when you really read about them, I feel it really humanizes people, because we know these big brands and these people on a stage, and when you really hear that they were sitting there and thinking about, hey, I really want to do this, and they lost their job, they got kicked out, but then they kept doing it. You're like, that's just a stubborn person who thought they were right. The world didn't know it, and they were not afraid. They had courage. So for me, that to me is so inspirational. I mean, it takes courage to be in medicine, but it's a different courage. After we get into medical school, and we, let's say, get our ticket, right? Nothing's guaranteed, but a ticket into a US medical school is a big deal. Then we can kind of relax for a second. We have to get work done, but we feel very comfortable. So to leave a area or a stage of discomfort takes courage, and it takes something to pull you out of there. To me, there was something there that made me feel so alive.
Yeah, so one of my favorites that I read somewhat recently was Shoe Dog by Phil Knight. I'm
I
not sure
just
if
read it
you
too. Yeah, a couple
Yeah,
months ago.
the founder of Nike. And I just found it to be so, it does, you use that word humanizing. And I think that's a great word to show the fears, the anxieties, the crazy roller coaster of building the Nike brand, and how you go from, and when they were making shoes in like the 60s, and all that was required for him to like go up and down through Japan and try to find factories. And it was just a fascinating story of him, working to actualize this vision. And I don't do anything with athletic apparel professionally, but I found his story just super motivating and inspiring.
I totally agree. And one of the things that resonated with me from that book, there's a lot of points in there, but initially he was selling another brand's shoe. And to me, that's what entrepreneurship is. That's why I always tell people, just move forward on something. You're passionate about it. You don't have to decide what it is yet. Just do something, and you will learn, and you will kind of pivot, and you will turn. And one day you might be this brand, one day you might not, but you will be wiser, and you will not regret it. So I had no idea that's how we started, but it's really interesting. That's the fun of entrepreneurship.
Totally agree. And it's funny, you mentioned the golden ticket, so to speak, of a med school admission. And it's true, like your path can be very, very, very defined as a physician. If you kind of want it to be, and you take that traditional path through med school, through training, and then into practice, there's a certain it guarantees the floor, so to speak. Like you're never going to make less than X number of dollars. You'll always have a prestigious profession, and you can kind of relax a little bit as far as the striving for that next thing. And I'm curious, for you, it seems like you got to a point where that was not desirable anymore, where you're a few years into your anesthesia practice and the safety wasn't desirable, or perhaps it wasn't as intellectually stimulating, and you wanted to continue to strive and continue to think critically and solve problems and go after something new. So tell me about how that unfolded.
Yeah. So the definition of a golden ticket is very different to me right now. So there is a price for safety. So even if you work so hard and you get into medical school, which I thought was the end all be all, you still pay a price long term for being in that stable position. And you become so specialized and kind of tunnel visioned that you lose confidence and skills and time to focus on other aspects of your life. And I'm in my early 40s right now, and maybe it's because it's phase 2 of my life, but there are so many things in life outside of just your career, outside of just of treating a patient. And even if you mean well and you want to help people, there's so many things going on out there outside of a hospital or surgery center where we as physicians can be helping. And that's actually where I have this physician empowerment philosophy that is not in the scope of a hospital or a practice. It's what physicians should be doing outside of our clinical practice. But there's really not a way to do it. There's not even a way to even think about it yet. So I'm starting to bring up content and talk about how we should be thinking about it without feeling guilty, by the way, because you actually have physicians who say, I've worked so hard for this job and now I'm actually not very fulfilled. I want to go spend time here. My perspective is we become physicians to help people, and we are only provided one vehicle right now, which is mainly clinical practice. But there are other vehicles that I want it to be mainstream to make us a more kind of comprehensive physician that's fulfilled sustainably.
Could not agree more. And this is a message that we've heard a lot on this show, is that it's my personal, super biased belief that the most empathetic, idealistic, others centered people in our society, many of them go through med school, and those are the people we need to equip and empower to lead, to make decisions, to be as involved as possible in policy and institutional organizational leadership, et cetera. So I think we're coming at this same idea from two different angles, and I could not feel more strongly about that. And so I'm curious, in that vein, you became aware of this opportunity with SmileMD. Talk about sort of your journey into dental anesthesia and how that unfolded.
Yeah. So initially, it started out as a few dentists coming up to myself and my co-founders to ask about services in their dental practice. High end, dental practices. They spend a lot of time, effort marketing it, and they said it'd be great if anesthesiologists came to my practice and provided sedation for these fee-for-service cash paying patients. And initially, our thought was, wow, we've never thought about what happens in the dental practices. I feel like the medical dental world is just a big wall. It's just completely separate. But really, if you think about it, oral systemic health, it's one spectrum. It actually should be more closely related than we allow it to be. So after we thought about it, and I attribute us moving forward to having co-founders. If I was alone, I might have said, that sounds cool. I'll look into it now. That sounds like a lot of work. But I have two other co-founders who are very close friends. So the trust is there, the excitement is there, and we all decided to move forward. And that, required looking for licenses, supplies, medications, going through scenarios of, all the good and bad stuff that can happen. That's our job, obviously. And then we moved forward and we did our first case probably several months after we decided to move forward, and took off from there.
So I'm going to ask a series of dumb questions because I'm not even a physician. And so some of this might be obvious to some of the listeners, but
No, that's
maybe
okay.
what types of procedures in a dental office require sedation?
Yeah, so great question. There's a spectrum of procedures, and so at a high level, there are procedures that require hours of sitting still in a dental chair. So at the least, there are some patients, let's talk about adults right now, that want to just feel a little more relaxed or want to be pretty sleepy because they don't want to sit and think about what is going on in their mouth. It's, there's an anxiety to that, which is
It makes me
completely,
anxious just hearing you describe it. I'm one of those
yes.
people.
Yeah. And there's a lot of people like that. So how do we enable comfort and safety in a dental office? And the dentist wants to give the best experience to their patient, and we want to make sure the patients get their care. So that's one example. And then if you look at kids, if a kid needs to get a tooth extracted, let's say there's some, a rotted tooth that happens in plenty of kids in this country, actually around the world. I'm a 5-year-old kid and I need to get a tooth extracted, and it's going to take 30 minutes. Well, a kid will not sit in a dental chair, right? So they will need to usually go to a surgery center or a hospital to have anesthesia, undergo the procedure, and come back. So SmileMD would come out and do a full general anesthetic on this patient or get them off to sleep safely, let the dentist or proceduralist do their procedure, and then we wake up the kid, recover, and go back home. And so we get to avoid utilizing the operating room, which should be used for, sterile procedures and things that need to be done in the hospital. This is something where they usually go to the hospital for anesthesia. So we're taking that out, and we're taking that element out, and we're saying we'll bring anesthesia to you and enable procedures that can be done that do not need a sterile operating room.
Is it common, or has it been historically, for dentists or other dental specialists to use, boarded anesthesiologists to do these types of things? Or is that required, or are there, other anesthesia providers that have been involved or that are?
Yeah, so every state is different, but basically there are dentists that do that themselves. They get a sedation license and do it themselves. They bring another dentist who's done an anesthesia training or residency. So there's dental anesthesiologists that do it. And then sometimes they call an anesthesiologist. I mean, I'll be honest that I think our field of anesthesiology isn't as familiar with doing that, but the more folks we talk to, if you have a friend or you get exposed to it and you're able to do that, or you want to do that, let's say in a different phase of your anesthesia career, some people do that. But it's definitely unknown. And the more we have discovered this, we've been doing this for 7 years now. There is so much opportunity to bring us the same standards we see in a surgery center or a hospital, and with regards to safety and protocols and a team and equipment versus a solo practitioner coming into a practice having everything and then not even having an assistant or an extra set of hands. There's so many things that can happen, and that's what SmileMD essentially is been building, is a foundation, protocols, a team, patient risk stratification. Does it belong here? Should they be going to the hospital? We have a governing board. We have peer review. So we're actually bringing the processes of a surgery or hospital into office-based anesthesia, which is taking a lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of intention to do it, but we feel like being anesthesiologists and being safe, that's the only way to do it.
Yeah. Is it so I'm just picturing a dentist, doing an extraction on a kid or something, and maybe being licensed to do sedation, whatever that means and whatever that training entails. Is that in itself safe, and is that common practice? Like, is that happening at most dental practices out there, or how many of all the dentists in America, how many are using a team like yours to do anesthesia on their higher risk patients?
It's not common at all to use a team. It's happening all over the country where dentists are still doing their own sedation. And it's been kicked up to certain eyes of associations and kind of the legal world, where I don't see that happening. I mean, back in the day before the field of anesthesiology was created, right? Surgeons were doing their own anesthesia in the operating room, and the field of anesthesia was created. So now you have at least I call them the proceduralist or the surgeon, and then you have the anesthesia provider. And so when you go to the dental world, that has not happened yet officially. So we think, based on what we've seen, there are a lot of scenarios we've seen where uh, really well-known dentists with great practices and a great reputation who do sedation in their own office, even if it's for adults and it's mild sedation, even some of their backup drugs and equipment that they were required to have were expired. They were hidden in a room somewhere. And you know what? I have to say that, the dentist doesn't wake up, start this practice to even worry about that. They shouldn't have to. But I think there needs to be some standard where there's no fear, liability, or most importantly, danger to the patient or themselves. So we're trying to, once again, just bring that standard. I mean, I left medicine, so I don't envy the red tape or bringing that red tape to anywhere. But I think there should be a foundational standard, and that's what we're trying to do in an efficient manner.
Yeah, and I was doing some reading on this a little while ago, trying to understand like what is dental anesthesia because it was still totally unknown to me. You mentioned that basically firewall between the dentistry and the
Yeah.
medical world, and I was kind of bumping into that. And I guess there was a case in California where a kid died during a tooth extraction, and there wasn't. It was they were I guess it was like a sedation case where the dentist was probably doing it themselves, and maybe they didn't have the infrastructure there to be able to provide appropriate care. And then it was like legislation and it's been, as you can imagine, when things get to this level, there's like lobbying groups and, well, we're going to cut off access to care if we create standards so high that most dentists can't, attain that, and it's going to create other unintended consequences. So can you talk a little bit about how you sort of process this tug of war between dentists who want to be able to treat everyone as the need arises, and also at the same time they want to provide appropriate care? Where do you think the sort of the right, where's the middle ground, or where should we land in this conversation?
So going back to my original conversation of how anesthesiology started, before we knew or had these high safety standards, surgeons were doing anesthesia and then doing the surgery. So it's a different level of procedures, but in the end, if I'm a dentist in California and I have a small kid come in, and we're talking 2, 3-year-old kids. And by the way, that this happened. I can't believe I'm forgetting the law that was passed, but this happens. This doesn't just happen one time and got kicked up. This has been happening. And what I have a real issue with, especially being a parent, is if I walk into a dental practice, of course I trust my dentist. Whatever's told to me, whatever's offered there, it makes sense. You just, as a consumer, as a parent, you think there's a standard. I think there needs to be all parties that are educated, and we're trying to do that in SmileMD, trying to talk, and we're talking with a lot of different people, policymakers, et cetera, just to say we shouldn't be doing this for anyone. And this has nothing to do with market share or anything like that. We want to enable everyone doing procedures to continue doing it, but they should be focusing on their procedures. If they need anesthesia, you should have a third party person, and every state's different who that is. You should not have the same person sedating a patient and doing the procedure. The fact that I even have to say this in 2021 sounds crazy. And yeah, so I mean that's it. We have to have that discussion ASAP. We need to implement so everyone. And if I'm a dentist in a smaller town and I'm hearing this, and that dentist says, "I just want to make sure my business is not affected." By the way, I agree with them, but we have to make sure there's a safe standard, and so we need to invest in solutions, need to get everyone on the same page, and bring our anesthesia folks, who we have a good amount of folks in hospital practices, et cetera, and how do we best utilize them to help them? I mean, that's what we need to do.
Yeah, I mean, as somebody who goes to the dentist and also as a dad, I'm thinking all these questions that I'm now going to be asking the dentist that I never even knew I needed to ask before.
Oh yeah. And unfortunately there's a lot of folks who just don't know even what to ask. Okay, you offer anesthesia here. Okay, your sedation is going to be for my kid or whoever they sign, and that's it. So there's really not even and it's been that way for a while. So maybe it's really hard to change that mindset in the world of dentistry. I think the newer grads, as well as in the dental schools, in the dental anesthesiology programs, they're bringing that awareness and training there. but there's still a whole generation of practitioners out there that are still utilizing the older ways, which are not safe.
So what does that dental anesthesiology track look like? Is that like a dental degree? You go through dental school and then there's like a bolt on, like a fellowship or residency in anesthesia specific to
Yeah.
dentistry after that?
Yeah, and we actually have some dental anesthesiologists that work for us in SmileMD. It's actually, I never knew they existed before as well, but I give a lot of respect to their training. So they are dentists. They got their dental degree. Some of them have been practicing for a while and decide they want to do dental anesthesia. And it's about a 2-year residency. Um, Many times it's in the medical residency programs. And after that, they are able to do dental anesthesia in various practices. And so their training is in hospitals and offices, and then they end up practicing in offices. So it's actually a great thing. And once I think it was just made official as a whole track or as a profession a few years ago. And so that being recognized is showing progress that's needed. And like I said, the younger folks coming out of training in dental school, I believe are getting used to another anesthesia party being there to do the anesthesia. So I think we're on the right track. I'm just worried about the patients today and tomorrow that don't have that, knowledge of what should be done.
Yeah. Part of me wonders, I love trying to understand like economic relationships in different contexts and who's paying for what and how much and what that means as far as the model. So I'm just thinking through this and thinking, well, if I'm a dentist, I'm doing a procedure, if I'm doing the sedation, presumably, and I shouldn't presume, I have no idea, but I'm guessing there's like a couple line items on here's the things I'm doing for the patient. If sedation or anesthesia is part of that, that's a billed service, I would imagine. And so, what does it mean that, first of all, I think that probably like less of dental care goes to the insurer compared to if I got a surgery. And then if there is an anesthesiologist doing my sedation or another person in the room, how does that impact cost and billing and what the dentist actually gets for their services, or does it?
Yeah, actually, I think a good exercise is to take a step back and look at patients need care. And right now, we're not even hitting a standard with certain practices and certain kids. And so if something happened and things are happening, devastations, what is that worth? There's not a price on that. So I would say that. Another thing is if a kid needs anesthesia and it can be done in the dental practice, what is that cost savings of time saved in transportation to that hospital or surgery center? There's certain kids in Ohio that are waiting 12 months for dental procedures to be done. 12 months because they need anesthesia and there's not much room in the operating rooms. And I'll tell you, especially, during COVID, there's been a big stress on hospitals. And so there's states that have kicked out the dentists from the operating rooms. So now if you're a kid in Michigan and you need to go to a hospital to get anesthesia for your procedure, you don't have a place to go. So think about that on the cost of the system. But what if we were in Michigan tomorrow and we hope to be in Michigan soon? Then we are able to take care of the patients in the practices and not even, most of them don't even need to go to the hospital. Think of the cost savings on that. So I think we should take a more systematic approach versus adding a line item of anesthesia this, because I understand because I've been in these conversations in the hospital where you have a radiology group who's the radiologists were doing their own sedation for MRI, and now they're saying, well, we need to add a line item about anesthesia, for anesthesia. What is that going to do? And I say, we're not asking the right question here. The risk we're doing right now and the way we're doing it is so prehistoric. Let's take a step back. In the end, we need to invest in the safety of our patients, which will, if we're just looking at numbers, that will be cost savings down the road. But we need to do things right. And then we need to do things efficiently and economically. I do believe in cost savings. I don't believe in adding more line items, but we just need to change the way we're looking at it.
Makes perfect sense. And I'm thinking about myself, like whenever you have a dental problem, it's not something usually that you want to wait even an hour
Oh,
to
yeah.
have taken care of, let alone months and months. And It,
And this,
it
this problem, sorry to interrupt, that we opened up in Illinois a few months ago. And that same kid who's waiting 12 months in Ohio is waiting up to 24 months in Chicago. And so now let's think about it. I have a rotted tooth. I'm 6 years old. I'm in pain. I can't focus, can't concentrate. I don't want to eat. So then you go into so many other issues outside of literally torturing a kid. And this is in the United States of America. This isn't a commercial for a third world country that we all focus on. This is in our backyard. This is in Chicago, Illinois, which is one of my favorite cities in the world. And this is happening. That is pathetic. So, and this is where the real Navin's coming out. I left my practice because I want to start impacting physician minds, healthcare minds, business minds, political minds to start paying attention on using time, money, and people on taking care of people. We are not doing that. And the hospital system I left and so many other hospital systems, they're building fancier towers. They're getting more specialized. They're getting more staff. And then they're complaining that, oh my gosh, it's a little bit slower. I have all this overhead. Well, you do not need that overhead. People aren't getting basic care, diabetes, weight, education, all these things. So I can go on this forever, but
yeah, you're
that's where my
preaching.
mind.
Yeah, preaching to the choir. So tell me, describe your business. And I 100% agree, like bringing anesthesia into the dental offices in that environment where hospitals and ORs are already maxed to provide the care at the point of need. It just makes all the sense in the world. So tell me about how your company functions.
Yeah. So if there are dental practices that need our services, we will have anesthesia days. So it has to make sense for us to bring a whole care team out. We bring an anesthesiologist, a recovery room nurse, and usually a paramedic as part of our care team. We bring our anesthesia machines, supplies, equipment, and a whole set of standards and policies that we do. So no matter what office we go to, everyone's on the same page of how we do various things, which I think is very important in the field of anesthesia and the field of trying to minimize mistakes and risks. So once an office schedules with us, we get all the patient information, we screen them, make sure they're the right patient to be done at an office, and we go there and we bring our whole care team out, and we have a full day of taking care of patients. And many of those patients were waiting for a long time to get to a hospital or surgery center, so we minimize that. We go to the community, so if it's 2 hours out in rural Ohio, we go there and bring our whole team. So now the patient and their families don't have to spend a whole day or even stay in a hotel one night or motel one night to go to the hospital. And then we take care of the patients and we discharge them after we feel like they're ready. And the time saved, if you can imagine, from going to a hospital and waiting there, everything. Yeah. So we're saving so many things. And in my opinion, we've offloaded a procedure that the hospital doesn't even want. Again, ask the state of Michigan. The state of Michigan kicked out all their dentists a few months ago, and we get calls from them that we would love to have your services here. That's a big issue, but the problem, we don't want it to get to that problem, but this is happening. This is just in dental. And so if you apply that to procedures in general that do not need to be done in a hospital or an operating room that needs to be sterile and have X amount of staff, doesn't it make sense to enable these procedures elsewhere, especially in offices where they're near their communities? You have offices that a lot of people, it's their brand and they're so proud, the dentist or the, any physician who has their own practice. No one wants it. Another thing I didn't bring up is they don't want to leave their practice. They don't want to travel to the hospital and wait for the OR schedule and waste a whole day and take care of two patients. So in this scenario, and I've been involved in a lot of different business ventures, this is a rare win-win-win. Whenever we're walking in, everyone seems to get it. Everyone seems to get something out of it, and everyone seems to buy in. And so we're just trying to get more people to the table to really educate them on this is what we think we should be doing.
It makes perfect sense. It makes me think this should be happening immediately everywhere. Why isn't it already?
Well, this is, we're
We're
growing.
getting the word out right now.
Last year we were in one state and now we're in 3 states. So we're expanding, and, great shows like you're doing right now, the ability to educate people on what we're doing and why we're doing it. I mean, I really think our colleagues in anesthesiology really would embrace that. And we're starting to get that. It was, 7 years ago when we were trying to recruit anesthesiologists to do cases, it was tough because people were like, wait, what is this? Now we have applications coming in saying we love this office-based practice that give us a lifestyle where I don't have calls or weekends. I'm taking care of ASA 1 and 2, relatively healthy patients in an office setting. It's very different, but I think it's a great pathway for a career for our future of anesthesiology.
So when you're working with a dentist office, would you do like one procedure day a month or two a month, and try to batch them? Is that kind of how your team works?
We definitely like to group them in one day. So if we have 4 or 5 patients and they can do it in one day, that makes sense. And some practices are busier than others. Some call us once a week, some call us twice, some call us once a month. We have that flexibility, so it totally makes sense for them and us. There's not a pressure or a contract that binds us to say we need to be here X amount of time. So we're trying to make it as friendly as possible, and for there to be such a small barrier for them to call us and say, this is hey, I need your services.
Got it. And so tell me about, the applications that you're getting. Like who's interested in joining your team? What's the profile of those either physicians or CRNAs or whoever it is?
So we use physicians right now, physicians and dental anesthesiologists. And we actually, I'll tell you, it's all over the board. We have folks who are middle of their practice and want to change. We now are starting to see some young folks who see the opportunity to practice like they imagined how practice would be, because the word's out that some hospital practices are a lot. It's a lot to take in. There's a lot of baggage. There's a lot of sick patients. There's a lot of things that aren't necessarily the greatest for a hospital practice, especially after you have your learning curve and you feel like you got your big cases out. Now let's put a little bit of a lower stress model in place. And we have folks who are closer to retirement who just want to slow down a little bit and pick their hours and pick their days and do that. So we're starting to see a variety. Now, if we had this interview 3 years ago, I would not be saying that. I would say it was more folks who had done some locums, maybe had a part-time private practice and just had extra time and they wanted to do some shifts with us. That still is the case, but that was our main probably applicant, your typical applicant. Now where it's all over the board. And we look forward to growing because I really think we're onto something, especially in light of COVID, where a lot of folks had more time to think. There was a lot of head butting between hospital administration and physicians and healthcare staff in general. And I think, to me, accelerated what physicians are in a hospital, which to me is looked upon as labor force. That in the end, we never want to think about it that way, but you have really highly skilled, intelligent, credible people who are placed in a position where their jobs are on the line if they need to cut staff or they don't have enough PPE. So, you're lower on the totem pole. That to me is unacceptable, but it's the reality. That's how physicians are looked upon within a hospital system. I saw that years ago, and it kills me to see that. And so I'm trying to, number one, help with awareness of that, because unless you're aware of it, you will not change. But I think, bringing that awareness and then bringing options of what we can do as physicians in society, what can we be doing to be at the table to make decisions? And it's not within the vehicle that's provided to us. We can't just climb up a hospital ladder and say, okay, I want to be at the table where decisions are made. We don't even know where that boardroom is. Trust me on that.
What has been the most challenging part of building this company?
I mean, I think the most challenging part of entrepreneurship and business is everything takes longer. And we see these successful brands and businesses out there, And many of us do not realize what they went through and how long they went through it, right? We are 7 years old. The SmileMD is 7 years old, and it feels like so much longer. And we've been through so much. There were times we were sitting at a table and we said, should we continue this? We're like really slow right now. But we decided, look, this is going to take a while. We had to pinch ourselves, remind ourselves, you know, give each other the optimistic views sometimes to just say, let's keep going. We're not risking a lot besides our time, our reputation. Who cares? We're starting a venture. People fail. And we had to risk our money, but in the end, you just need to keep going. So that's probably the challenge, is that everything takes a lot longer than I anticipated. And even knowing that now, it still feels long.
Are there any regulatory or legislative types of challenges or like red tape or anything like that that causes problems for you to try to get into other states or do these types of procedures with dentists? And going back to that firewall that we mentioned before, where like the dentistry and the medical world, maybe the laws aren't made to accommodate dental anesthesiologists.
So I'm going to ask you a question. You're in the United States of America with the US healthcare system, and you want to take care of a patient utilizing medications in an office that still, requires a dentist, or still allows a dentist to do their own sedation. So you tell me if there are obstacles and a lot of paths to navigate, if you had to guess.
Yeah, the question answers itself, doesn't it?
Yeah, there are, and we've spent a lot of time. When I was saying we've spent a lot of time, money, um, and intention on building the foundation, a lot of it is that as well. Outside of protocols and equipment and processes and good people, by the way, we've had so many great people join the team. There are so many ways to navigate this, and then when you open up in a new state, they have their own set of rules, own stakeholders who we would need to talk to. So absolutely. And it's literally why we have a governing board, we have compliance officers, we have a lot of folks that just work on that.
How is this received in the dental community? Do you find that most dentists are receptive and like welcoming, or is there like a territoriality that makes it a challenge to introduce these ideas?
Sure. So for the most part, very welcoming. We are enabling their procedures. That's how they look at it. And there's a few that didn't understand it, or if they're been doing sedation for years on adults and they don't want anyone else. I don't see them as, them seeing us as a threat, but just, no, I'm not interested. I'm good. But there are more and more dentists. And as I was telling you, the young folks that are coming out of training, they're used to now having anesthesia services that they got used to in training. And so they welcome it. We get calls from all around the country that if we are in that state yet, they say, hey, SmileMD over here yet? We get calls all the time. And so the ones that have been on the fence or nervous to say, hey, I always send my patients to the operating room, or I just send it out and refer it out. Once we start educating on what we do, and we have an anesthesia day there or have our first SmileMD day there, by the end of the day, they're usually they appreciate the process and how serious we take it. Because I think in the end, the first thing that comes to mind is comfort and liability. And as soon as we come in and do our thing, take our time and educate, talk to the patients, talk to the parents, they feel at ease. And then they realize how much more efficient their day was. And then they realize that they don't have to refer out. There's so many wins for that dentist. And so if they give us the opportunity to prove that, it's good. And we see that changing already.
Not to mention the wins for the patient. And
Oh, absolutely. Which if you're the dentist, the patient is your client, or the patient is your
right.
customer, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, win-win-win.
I want to wrap up with this last question, and I appreciate your time today, Dr. Goyal.
Yeah, of course.
I haven't asked this question on the show in a long time, but I want to ask you in the context of your business, because as you mentioned, blood, sweat, and tears, the things that go into this, the moments of doubt when you're in that room with your two partners, and you're like, oh my gosh, like another dentist just canceled on us. Is it even worth trying again tomorrow? Can you maybe just tell a brief anecdote and take us to a moment of either, significant challenge or that you pushed through, or a moment of like renewed resolve where you were faced with a particular hardship and where you were able to sort of renew your own vision for your company and the future that you wanted to see manifest here, where kids don't have to wait 2 years to get a tooth extracted, and how that played out in that particular scenario that sort of enabled you and your partners to keep on pushing forward?
Yeah, sure. I think early on when we were doing fee for service adults, we were very sporadic, and we treated it like a side gig initially. And when we got really slow, we were really thinking about, hey, should we pause this for a while? Should we just stop? It's, we can maybe think about this later on, but we're really slow. We're putting a lot of time on a lot of phone calls. And my buddy Tharun, who is a pediatric anesthesiologist, and he was working at the local children's hospital, he called us and he said, we can, but just so you know, the surgery center here that does the dental cases is backed up 9 months. He's like, we could be doing a lot of these cases at these offices. We know we have something here. Why don't we really consider that? And so for me personally, and I think for both my co-founders, it became a moment of, this is something bigger than just providing some sedation for some adults who can pay cash. This has a social impact, a healthcare impact, and access to care impact. And I think that rejuvenated us, and it got us through a lot of tough times. And that's where, in general, the businesses that I'm involved in and invest in and build are impact driven for people, something that benefits people. And we have a lot of access to healthcare, access to education, access to clean water. And yes, we're talking about the USA, not even starting with other countries yet. So I think if it's a purpose-driven organization, that will get you through a lot of hard times. You will hit hard times, you will hit obstacles. And when you do, it becomes maybe easier or maybe justifiable to keep going.
Mm-hmm. And it shows in that moment that you picked the right partners too. Because if you get into a business or a venture, someone as entrepreneurial as you've definitely interacted with these people out there who want to start a business because they want to make money. And that's great. And, in a capitalistic society, economic benefit and reward for solving a problem is the right way. That's the right way for it to work. But when things get tough, money is not enough in that gut check moment to get you back on the horse and keep riding in the direction that you know is the right direction. So I think that just speaks a lot to the vision that you have and that you share, and the real the constitution of your partnership and their shared vision for that. And I mean, I'm inspired just hearing you tell the story. So Dr. Goyal, it's been a pleasure hearing from you today about SmileMD. Thanks for joining us today on APM Success.
Justin, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure talking with you, and I appreciate all that you're doing and getting the stories out. So our anesthesia colleagues, I'm sure, appreciate it as well. So thank you for having me.
If you liked what you heard this week, head on over to apmsuccess.com, where you can find more content and free resources to help you build a successful career in anesthesia and pain management. If you wanted to leave a review in iTunes, I'd also really appreciate it. Thanks for using some of your valuable time to join me today on APM Success.